Okay, mic check 1 2 1 2. You got mic check 1 2 1 2. All right.
News in America or in Great Britain and these countries. All right, guys, back with a new video, and I want to talk to you about a very important subject that sort of deals with geopolitics. And by the way, this is what this particular channel shines the most. I can not only offer you mixed martial arts content, but I'm also going to give you the news. And unfortunately, in the recent current events, there have been a terrorist attack that had happened in the southern part of Russia, in particular, somewhere near the Dagestani region. And by the way, a lot of this story deals with one of Khabib's gym mates, which, by the way, has been unnamed and have yet been unknown, but is known to the FSB, which is the Russian Federal Bureau of Investigation, their own version of it, as this guy that's been under radar for a while. And this happened to be a training partner of Khabib involved in this. So for those of you that don't understand what is going on right now, because more than likely you are watching news in America or in Great Britain, and these countries, as you know, the NATO states, they're not exactly friendly with Russia. So, in other words, any terrorist attack that happens towards Russia or anything bad that happens to them, it's not going to be the highest topic in the land, okay? That's just really the best way to put it. And I know that sounds harsh, but that's the reality of it. Russia is in the back pocket of whatever type of information that is out there regarding this particular country. So why? Because obviously they are in conflict with Ukraine. And as a result of that, well, the United States really does not want to give them any clout in any kind of way. But at the same time, when you're dealing with a terrorist attack, you can't help but report on it. Now, obviously, there was the Islamic State attacks that have happened in Moscow a couple of months ago, which was done in Russia. Now it's happening in an Orthodox church, and not only that, a Jewish synagogue was attacked at the same time. And ironically enough, that is the same time that all these synagogue riots have been going on in LA as of late. Not riots, but more like a little street fight here and there, a little protest, banter, and a combination of people just scrapping it out outside because they are angry about the Palestinian and Gaza situation. So that's what's going on. Now, what is going to happen with Islam Makhachev, Khabib, and Team Eagle, being that they are now under heavy scrutiny by the Russian government, on top of the fact that Khabib has had his $3 million seized by the Russian government based on not paying any taxes. So where is this whole story going to lead, right? Is it a separate issue? Probably so, because obviously you're dealing with taxes, but then you're also dealing with a teammate that is known to have committed a terrorist attack. So this is a very difficult situation that Khabib is in. But you got to understand something. Here's something you got to understand, right? What you got to understand is that we are in a situation where the Russian government may not be very objective-minded in how they're going to approach the situation. And what do I mean by that? Well, are they going to separate the issue of Khabib having tax issues and having a teammate that had just committed a terrorist attack? Now, here's the other aspect of this that you got to understand from an objective point of view. There's a lot of guys that train in multiple gyms around the world, and it doesn't mean that you are associated with them in any kind of way. I'll give you a little bit of a story on my end, right? Because let's just be honest. There's been a lot of people that know who I am before the YouTube. They understand the type of, let's say, ideas or opinions that I've had or worldview, right? Sometimes when you have a certain worldview, you're going to be looked at by government agents, whether that would be your own domestic government agency or whether that would be an agency from around the world that may take a look at some particular interest in you based on specific correlations or networks you may have. Okay? So back in 2011, let's just say that I had these types of views that were on the fringe, that were rogue to the world, that may be out of the lines of norm in everyday society. Okay? Let's just try to put it plainly as that. Now, have I been looked at by, let's say, the alphabet guys? Maybe. I don't know. I'm not going to confirm or deny one way or the other, right? But I will say this. They went into talking with different people that I've trained with. And why am I bringing this up? Because obviously these supposed terrorists that committed these acts trained in Khabib's gym, and now the FBI, or at least the Russian version of that, which is known as the FSB, is very curious to know what are the ties with Khabib and this particular suspect. My answer is probably nothing. That is the most plausible answer that I could give you. The problem is we don't know if that's all it will be. Why? Because Russia does not operate like America. In other words, put it like this. Is there corruption amongst the feds? Is there corruption amongst police forces, amongst law enforcement? Yeah, 100% there is. You can't deny that. However, between America and Russia, who would you rather have a fair trial with if you know deep in your heart that you are innocent? And even if you're not innocent, guess what? You would want to have a trial in America over Russia. And that's really what it comes down to. So why am I saying that in regards to this subject? Because Khabib may be put in a scrutiny that he doesn't need to be, because let's just call it what it is. The Russian government is not exactly a very fair and honest type of system. And neither is the United States. But the one thing you can count on in the United States is its checks and balances that you can use to either leverage for yourself or leverage your innocence, or maybe even evade a guilty verdict when you know deep in your heart that you're guilty, but they don't have the proof of it. With the Russian government, is it more plausible that they're going to act out of emotions? I'm going to say, yeah, there is a high plausibility of the Russians acting in emotions rather than actual logic and burden of proof. And the problem is, we don't know what that is going to be. It would be easier if we knew that America was the one that was investigating this case and it took place in America, but it's not. You're dealing with a Russian government that is highly, highly paranoid. You want to know why I'm telling you that they're paranoid? The Russians are blaming NATO for this terrorist attack, saying that, well, you know what? It was the Americans, it was the British, it was the French and the Germans, the whole NATO crew that was behind all this as a false flag operation. Very similar to the type of false flag operations that you saw in the Call of Duty game, the one scene where I believe it was called No Russians, where you went and shot up an entire Russian airport, but now happening obviously in reverse. No, actually not in reverse. It's actually, a Russian on Russian situation, because the suspects that committed these acts were done by Muslims from the Caucasus region. So they're still Russian, so that makes it a Russian on Russian crime nonetheless. I just hope that the Russians are going to be fair towards Khabib. Here's something you got to understand. You don't control who trains at your gym. And let me tell you, one of the reasons why you can't control who trains at your gym is because there's so many people that join combat sports gyms for different reasons, right? There is a saying that goes, if you want to see a cop and a criminal in one place, go to a boxing gym, or i.e., in the modern terms of MMA's popularity, you would say go to an MMA gym, which is more prevalent than, let's say, a boxing gym, based on the fact that boxing gyms, well, they're limited, right? They're a limited form of fighting, but MMA gyms, they offer jiu-jitsu. And a lot of cops, law enforcement, and military guys, they love to train jiu-jitsu. But guess what? So do the homies. So you're going to run across the homies, and then you're going to run across some criminals when you are dealing with a combat sports gym of any kind. So, in other words, you're going to have different types of people that are going to be there. And guess what? How about this? Speaking of Chechnya and Dagestanis, how about the Boston Bombers, the Tsarnaev brothers? Do you know what happened after the Boston Marathon bombing? You know what happened? They went and investigated their gyms. Now, obviously, the FBI knew that they had nothing to do with it, and some of these guys that they trained with weren't even Muslim, so there was no connection to Islamic terrorism with any of these gyms that they had. But they had to go and talk to them because it's just the procedural thing that they do in law enforcement, and in particular in the FBI, trying to interrogate, trying to interview all different types of people in order to understand the full pieces that is in front of you and what is going on with this particular tragedy. So all I can say at the end of this video is that I hope they are very fair to Khabib, because the one thing that we can criticize America for is, yes, has America committed atrocities around the world when it comes to the military-industrial complex and the wars that they are waging around the world? Yeah, there's no doubt about that. For the past 2 decades, this is what America has done. But the one thing I know I can be very confident towards America in is their judicial system. And by the way, the judicial system in America, in comparison to Russia, in my opinion, it goes like this. It is a 50-50 situation in America. What exactly do I mean by that? Well, it's 50% just in the way that it should be, and then it's 50% corrupt. And that other 50% can be broken down to 25-25 based on which way you really want to go, meaning that how many of them are letting the guilties go as opposed to the people that are innocent, and then how many people that are innocent actually get called in when they really have done nothing wrong. Either way, you got to understand, right? That is America in a nutshell. You have an opportunity, even if you're guilty, beyond a reasonable doubt to your inner mind, that, hey, you know what? I can still fight this case. You can't do that in other countries. You can't do that in the Middle East. You can't even do that in Romania, as you've seen with Andrew Tate. You can't do that in certain places. But guess what? You can do that in America. You can get away with things even if you are guilty. But let's just be honest about this. We know Khabib has nothing to do with terrorism whatsoever. Nothing to do with it at all. It's not in his particular, I'm not going to say it's not in his DNA, because every man, especially cage fighters, for crying out loud, have a high propensity for violence more than the average person, right? So this idea that he's not capable of it, but ideologically, I just don't think he is in that particular sphere of thought. And why? Well, let's take a look at some issues that I have with the idea of Khabib being a radical or being an extremist. Well, first of all, let's really define these words into really what they are. Are there people that are going to look at Khabib and say, you know what, you had something to do with this? Of course, if you're a Khabib hater, if you're Conor McGregor, who has something against Khabib, you will say the following, that, hey, you know what, he's guilty of this, and I'm going to say the most low-hanging fruit statements that I can find, even though I have no evidence of him being involved in any terrorist attack, but I'm just going to say it because I don't like him. And then he's going to say that I don't like Ali because Ali, his manager, has been involved in some nefarious things, according to Conor McGregor and his team and whatever it is that they found on Ali Abdelaziz. So there's a lot of things to take a look at when you consider, let's say, somebody that is in the opinion of Conor McGregor against Khabib. But what I know about Khabib, quite honestly, is that he grew up doing nothing but sports his entire life. Now, not to say that his dad is a pacifist, but guess what? His dad refused to go to war with the Soviet Union against the Afghans. Now, you can probably say, well, that's because he doesn't want to fight a radical Afghani, Sunni, Islamic group or anything like that. Okay, maybe you can lean it towards that direction. But the reality is this, right? There is a difference between radical and extremism. And anybody that looks at Khabib will say, well, this guy is a radical. Well, why? Because he doesn't believe that women should be ring card girls, nor does he even believe that women should compete. So in the Western mindset, this is radical. However, this does not make him an extremist, because an extremist is somebody that is willing to commit violence in the act of religion. So this is not this man. This is not who he is. He is not a violent extremist. Is he a radical? Well, here's something you people have to understand that is very controversial to understand and grasp. Islam is a radical religion in and of itself. Why? Fasting for 16 hours during Ramadan and doing it for 30 days, that's radical. And actually following through with it, that is radical. Going to Mecca and spending all your money just so that you can experience this Hajj and spiritual upliftment and religious obligation is radical, because you're spending a certain amount of money just to go to a place, but obviously it's meaningful. Obviously you can go to places and create meaningful memories by vacations and whatnot, but you're doing it with going to Mecca. So there's a certain level of radicalism that I guess you have to invest yourself in order to be an orthodox, straight path Muslim. That's just the reality of it. But understand that radical does not mean extreme. You want to know what else is radical in ideas? The idea of being anti-abortion. Now, to some people, that is a radical idea. It really depends on who you are and how you look at the world. But as far as Khabib goes, he's not an extremist, and neither is anybody in his team. Now, here's the other complicated nuances that you got to understand. Within that community, are there people that are going to be even more extreme? Yes, because people come in variations. And then there are people that are going to have something in common, and they're going to bond with that, but then they're going to go against each other in, let's say, certain political ideas that they may not agree on. What's an example of this? I'll give you an example. And this has happened in Libya a lot, okay? In Libya, you have people that are for the Islamic State, and then there are people in Libya that are for the Libyan regime that is currently controlling the country right now through the form of a government, okay? And they play both sides. Now, what is the reason for this? Maybe the reason why the people in Libya who are both in the Islamic State and in the government forces are playing both sides is primarily because of the fact that it's either economic reasons why they're doing it. Maybe both sides are paying them, and perhaps maybe they have an economic reason for it, or maybe an ideological reason leaning one way or another, being pro-government or anti-government, i.e. the Islamic State. Or there's an even bigger complications to the nuances that we're talking about, where people have dual ideologies. And what do I mean by that? Well, there are people that believe that the Islamic State should be established, but they also want to side with the government so that when the Islamic State comes in, maybe they can negotiate with them or play both sides or whatever it is that comes with this dual neutrality or dual identity that they have going on within the conflict. So that is the multiple variations that you have to understand with this matter at hand. Not many MMA channels, let alone geopolitical channels, are going to explain to you this particular matter at hand the way that I'm explaining to you right now. Why? Because understand something. When you're dealing with terrorism, when you are dealing with religious extremism, when you are dealing with geopolitics, and then on top of that, when you are dealing with mixed martial arts fighters that are involved in this particular space and being from in a part of the world where radical extremism is prevalent, it's a very complicated situation. Because yes, Dagestan is a very, very conservative country in terms of Islamic practices, but it is also a country that has a certain level of tolerance. There was one time where Islam Makhachev mentioned how people who are going to nightclubs in Dagestan are going to enter the hellfire based on this new modernization that the Dagestanis are sort of adopting. So you see, they're not all the same. You look at Islam Makhachev. He goes and takes pictures with women. You will never see Khabib do that. And if you do, it's within a certain distance. There have been pictures with Islam Makhachev sort of putting his arms around other women that are not married to him, which, by the way, is forbidden in Islam. So once again, I'm not here to agree or disagree with any of these actions that they do or the choices that they make in their personal lives, but I'm here to just give you the objective reality and the variations that comes with these types of situations and these types of men, in particular the Dagestanis, Khabib, Islam Makhachev, in comparison to this person that committed this terrorist attack that just happened to be on their team. So don't forget to like and subscribe as I give you guys the best details mixed martial arts can offer in terms of YouTube channels and what I can present in this content and what I can talk about as opposed to what other channels can't talk about. Like and subscribe for that reason alone. I'll see you guys in the next one. And it is getting dark right now on a Monday night here in Sacramento, California, West Side. I will see you guys in the next one, inshallah.
All right. And we are 15, 18, 20 seconds into the 30-minute mark of this live stream, and we are live. So I got to tell you, I'm quite excited about this particular card, okay? And for those of you that have been staying on to watch the previous video, and if you want to watch that again, you can obviously just rewind here or check it out on my channel titled Khabib and Terrorism Accusations Against His Team. Obviously, this was during the summertime when Khabib was accused of such things, and here he is now looking back at all of this, back at it again, back to work with his team, ready to get some championship wins. And in the meantime, it is Conor McGregor who is in trouble. Now, look, I understand that this is not about the Conor case because you never want to make it about Conor, especially when there are exciting fighters and exciting times going on in MMA right now. Speaking of MMA, shout outs to Nick23 MMA. And I was on the No Chill MMA podcast chats the other day, and I saw a name that said, I hate all names that end with MMA. Well, guess what, man? If you love MMA, you're going to put it on your name, you're going to put it on your identity, and that's that. Speaking of which, obviously, yeah, I didn't want to make it about the Conor situation, but understand this, right? Conor McGregor may have lost a civil case, not a lot of money. And like I said, James Lawrence was the scapegoat. He went in there, got acquitted. Now he has to get Nikita to pay all that money back. And maybe at this point, the money is not worth it for Nikita, or maybe it is. Who knows? Who knows what's in her head? I just know that she's not all innocent in all this, but it does lead Conor McGregor into a very bad road of just continuous one loss after another. And I'm not talking about losses in the octagon. So we'll leave it at that. But speaking of which, Islam Makhachev, Omar Nurmagomedov are set to both defend and challenge for a world title. And I'm telling you straight off the bat, it's going to be a clean sweep for them. In the first fight between Arman Tsarukyan and Islam Makhachev, it was awesome. Absolutely awesome. The scrambles. It looked like two lions and very agile cats going at it. Just constant. And I think Arman had one takedown in that whole entire fight, which, by the way, I got to tell you, it's not easy to do. You know what's crazy? This fight between Islam Makhachev and Omar Nurmagomedov and Merab, they're very similar. You see, Arman Tsarukyan, he can knock you out. He can submit you, very well-rounded. But in his core, he's a wrestler. And ultimately, that's what led him to have that type of matchup with Islam Makhachev. And the way that it looked was because he was able to maintain a certain wrestling pace. And the scrambles looked exactly as they did, so it became a very difficult matchup for Makhachev. But what about the fact that Islam Makhachev is now highly formidable on the feet? We've seen him knock people out with the hands. We've seen him knock people out with head kicks. Can we see more of that in this fight? And to be quite honest with you, if Arman Tsarukyan makes a mistake, I think that is where this fight is going to be very dangerous for him. In all true to God honesty. That's where it would go really bad. Because you know what? The fact that their wrestling is going to cancel each other out, they're going to kickbox each other. I know that they've had great scrambles in the first fight, but the fact that they know that, they're going to be coherent of that reality and try not to make it a reality into the rematch. And by the way, this fight is 5 rounds in comparison to the first time when they had fought in a 3-round fight, which, by the way, impressively enough, for Arman Tsarukyan's UFC debut. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine the madness behind that? I mean, really, it is your first fight in the UFC and you're fighting Islam Makhachev. No wonder you are the #1 guy in the world right now. And as a result of being the #1 guy in the world, you're right back at it, fighting him for the title. Your UFC debut is literally your UFC championship fight. Congratulations. But I don't think you're going to win it. And I know that that may seem biased because I have a beard like the Dagestanis. I share a religion with the Dagestanis. They're my brothers. And then on top of that, I've had experience actually being on the phone and talking to Abdul Manap before he had passed away. And for those of you that think I'm capping, I'm going to pull up this picture right now just to kind of give you guys a bit of some context in the type of people that I know in this industry. Hold on. Let me pull this up. But the Omar Nurmagomedov and Merab fight, I'm going to be honest with you, I think that fight is going to be a much tougher fight, a way tougher fight for way tougher than the Islam and the Sarukian fight. I'm just going to say that. It's going to be way tougher. In other words, what I'm trying to say is that it's going to be easy work for Islam Makhachev, but I think Omar has to work a little bit harder on this fight. Really. Like that's really how I sincerely see this fight going. I think, yeah, I think there's going to be difficulty on the part of okay, here it is. Let me show you the picture of me and Abdul Manap right here. Check it out right there. That's me and Abdul Manap back in 2020. So this was just months prior to the Tony Ferguson fight. So yeah, this is on, wow, how about this? This is on June 24th. When was that video? Wow, June 25th. So that video that I played for you guys earlier. So, okay, so again, it ties in to all of this. Throwback 2020. May Allah bless the father of all Muslim fighters, Abdul Manap Nurmagomedov, the greatest coach in the history of mixed martial arts. And by the way, like and subscribe to Kyrie Abu El-Kheer MMA at YouTube. All right. So yeah, there you go, guys. That's my experience having a talk with Abdul Manap. Obviously, at the time, the overall consensus that he was trying to do was come to the United States because obviously it would have been beneficial to coach not only the Dagestanis in America and fighting at America, but also other American fighters that could benefit from training with the likes of Abdul Manap. So for those that have tapped in right now, don't forget to like and subscribe. I just showed you guys a picture of me and Abdul Manap FaceTiming. So yeah, give me a like and subscribe as we talk about Islam Makhachev versus Arman Tsarukyan, and now Merab defending his title against Omar Nurmagomedov. So here's the deal with this whole situation, right? I think that Merab was sort of punked into taking this fight. Look, Merab didn't need to take this fight. He already won in UFC's Noche. That wasn't too long ago. UFC Noche. When was that? UFC Noche. That was back in September. Okay. So it was back in September. And now he's jumping back in January. Okay. So he's jumping back in January. I don't know, man. I don't like that. Not for Merab. I don't like it for Merab. Listen, I'll tell you all day right now, I'm biased towards the Dagestani, straight up. There ain't no doubt about it. I'm 100% biased and for them, okay? But it's not a good idea for Merab to take this fight. But he takes it because he plays into his whole entire character. Look, I'm telling you right now, Merab got punked into this fight and he made a bad decision and taken it because of this. Merab is one of those guys that is crazy. Okay. And I'm not saying crazy in a clinical way or in medical terms or diagnosis of any kind. Not whatsoever. I'm talking about the fact that he's crazy in this identity that he's trying to play up to the world. And what exactly do I mean by that? Check this out. You ever met the craziest guy in the group? Oh, yeah, Mike. You dare Mike to do anything. Hey, Mike, go climb that tree. Yeah, I'll go do it. Hey, Mike, go jump off a cliff, with this water right here, or go swim in the river. By the way, I believe when I was 24 years old, I almost drowned in the American River, but I mean, look, I'm a great swimmer. I was able to manage swimming against the tides and was able to pull it off. But anyways, yeah, Marab is that guy. He's the crazy guy of the group. He's the guy that you dare to do something and he's down to do it. All right, but here's the thing about it, right? It's stupid. Those types of guys, they are what we call in the hood crash out dummies. Okay? And crash out dummies can also be a term that a guy is willing to engage in violence faster than the next guy. That could also mean that as well. But nevertheless, here's something you got to understand, right? Marab is that guy. He's a crash test dummy. And all of this only favors Omar Nurmagomedov to the fullest. There's no doubt about it. It favors him. And Marab, you're making the biggest mistake of your life, and it's going to show that night. Look, the Marab that you've seen, where he is just extremely fast, very what do you call it? Very volume heavy. You're not going to see that in this fight. And you want to know why you don't see that in this fight? Here's the thing. In these types of situations where you have a volume and spam takedown artist in the likes of Marab, it requires peaking. Now, for those of you that are casuals, and even worse, for those of you that have never trained mixed martial arts or any combat sports ever, this is a very foreign concept to you. Let me explain something to you. You are not 100% yourself 24/7 and 365 days a year. It is impossible to do that. Virtually impossible. So that means there is a peaking phase in your body. Let me break it down to you what a training camp is like. Okay? A training camp goes something like this. In week 1, you kind of start off just a little bit light and this and that. Week 2, you turn it up a notch. Week 3, you turn it up some more. And then week 5 or 6 and 7, you start gradually speeding up and extending the volume, extending the training sessions, extending the intensity. And then after all of that, let's say you got 4 weeks left or 3 weeks left into a fight camp, and that could be boxing, MMA, wrestling. You don't really have a lot of time to peak because you're wrestling every week, or jiu-jitsu. Other combat sports where you plan for a very long time to get ready, like a training camp, right? This is how it goes. And so then the 3rd week before, 3 weeks out into the camp or the fight, you're sort of relaxing, dialing it down, sort of just focusing on speed rather than long-term, full-rounded, anaerobics or aerobics that you have to do. But yeah, the volume lessens is what I'm saying. So this is peaking. And within this peak, then you start recovering and then you start building your testosterone. It starts raising because now you're getting the amount of rest. Basically, everything that you've worked for is now coming back to you with all that rest. Shout outs to Daniel 218 with the Georgian flag. So yeah, it's going to be Georgia versus Dagestan. And on the other side, it's going to be Armenia versus Dagestan. And what does that tell you? What is the common denominator here? Eastern Europeans are the quintessential, how do I say this? They are the quintessential staple in combat sports right now. And that includes boxing as well. Obviously, with Arthur Beterbiev, that's a fine example of that. Bivol, okay? And again, I'm not just talking about the Muslim Eastern European guys. I'm talking about all of the Eastern European guys, right? Look at Bivol. Actually, you know what? Bivol did convert to Islam. And strangely enough, that is the reason why him and his wife were arguing, was because he decided he was going to convert to Islam. That's very interesting. I never thought about that. So, you know what? Maybe we can segue this into a Bivol conversation. I did have a video on the matter of Bivol and his wife, right? But this is actually new information for me. I didn't talk about this in the video, but I will say that it was amazing that I didn't really know about this, right? So his wife divorced him because he converted to Islam. Very interesting. But yeah, here's a video on that from a month ago.
Dmitry Bivol lives a very private life. So it made me wonder, in this private life that he has, obviously, we don't know if he has anything that resembles, let's say, Blueface and Krishan, which, by the way, is a very documented toxic relationship within the hip-hop community. But nonetheless, Bivol's wife was seen in a Russian podcast reacting to the win of Arthur Beterbiev, saying, well, this is karma. Well, in what way? Considering the fact that Arthur did a great job, but it's not like Bivol was really that far away. Some people argue that the fight was 7-5 or 8-4 in the favor of, let's say, Bivol, which means it's a very close fight. And it showed that Bivol is literally one of the all-time greats just based on that performance alone. I really mean that, because obviously nobody has ever taken Arthur Beterbiev to the scorecards, but he did. Nobody won the type of rounds that he won against Arthur Beterbiev, but he did. Ultimately, it was the result of Arthur Beterbiev to his favor, whether you can call that hometown advantage because he was in Saudi Arabia, or maybe perhaps one of the judges was friends with Ramzan Kadyrov, who was in attendance during that fight. Either way, we don't know. It's a speculation. But one thing you got to rest assured is that when it comes to boxing and MMA, there will always be controversial scorecards, and you're never going to agree with them. So as a result of that, you can't say that this was a screw job. You can't say that this was all planned or the judges were paid or this and that. Look, Eddie Hearn is the one right now screaming travesty. But it is also Eddie Hearn that you have to understand has gone out of his way to dine judges nights before a big fight, or the day before the weigh-ins and this and that, or during a press conference fight week. He has gone out of his way to take care of judges in hotel rooms and giving them fancy dinners and big restaurants to go to. So make of that as you will. You can take any conclusion of that as you want, but that is the facts. And I'm not going to say that Eddie Hearn has done anything like that, but you can't really know one way or the other because you have no proof. Just like with this one, you got no proof that people were screwing the judges in favor of Arthur Beterbiev. It was a very close fight, and this is what I'm trying to tell you guys. When it comes to close fights, it's not always a screw job. You need to understand that. These judges, they have a very hard task, at least within the 36 minutes that they are working. It's a very hard task. You got to figure out who did the most and who did what. If you like the volume, then you're going to go for Bivol. If you like the ringmanship in which Arthur Beterbiev was fighting with aggression, moving him forward, well, then of course you're going to score into his favor. Boxing is subjective, MMA is subjective, and that also includes the realm of judging. Close fights are not always a screw job, and that's literally the hypothesis that I'm trying to make with you guys, that I'm trying to make you understand. Because it's easy to throw conspiracy theories, it's easy to throw certain evidences or lack of, and say, you know what, this is what I saw, this is what it is, this is the reason why they're doing a screw job, because Eddie Hearn goes and dines a bunch of judges the nights before the fights, and he's done that. Now, some will say, well, you know what, maybe it was Turki El-Sheikh that screwed the whole entire operation because of the fact that he's a Muslim fighter. Well, not so fast. Obviously, we got to take what they're doing for face value, because Turki El-Sheikh was very upset of the decision. He even went up to Bivol and said, you know what, I think you won that fight, brother. So therefore, we must continue with the rematch. This fight had no rematch clause. And all of a sudden, the Sheikh decided, you know what, we're going to have a rematch, when they didn't have a rematch clause to begin with. You want to know why? Because they thought that this fight was going to go one way or the other. It was going to be definitive. It was either going to go into one side of Bivol, or it was going to go in the other side of Arthur Beterbiev. One side. But that's not the case. What we got out of this fight was a potential draw. There were announcers and commentators, as soon as the bell rang in the 12th, proclaiming that perhaps maybe there is a draw to this particular fight. The reality is that wasn't the case. They gave it to Arthur Beterbiev. Now, if there were other judges that judged that fight, could it be possible that maybe the fight would have gone another way? Of course. Of course. What about those other Max Holloway and Volkanovski fights? Both those fights could have gone either way in the direction of Max Holloway, but they didn't, because for whatever reason, the judges that showed up that night went out of their way to score it for Arthur Beterbiev. And why? Because of their own subjective view of boxing. What exactly is that? What is their subjective view of boxing? Well, their subjective view of boxing is the guy who moves forward, the guy who fights with more aggression, i.e. general ringsmanship. They gave that to Arthur Beterbiev. But what if you like a much more technical fight in terms of being a counterpuncher, being the type of guy that, let's say, that likes to fight off their back foot? There's a lot of fights that people have won in similar instances with that particular style and trajectory and game planning. One example is Oscar De La Hoya and Felix Trinidad. Oscar De La Hoya was backing up the whole entire fight, and Felix Trinidad was basically doing the same thing that Arthur Beterbiev was doing in that fight, which was what? Move forward. Move forward while Oscar De La Hoya was moving back. And guess who won the fight? It was Felix Trinidad. And I remember that fight vividly in 1999 because I was in my neighbor's house, who, by the way, were a Puerto Rican family. And you would imagine that they were diehard for Felix Trinidad. And they had one relative that was, I believe, an in-law who was El Salvadorian. And obviously he scored the fight for Oscar De La Hoya. But here's another thing a lot of people have to take into consideration. And by the way, I'm going to go into the wife of Bivol in a second, because that's also important to talk about. Because obviously I'm not just a combat channel. I'm not just a sports channel. I'm also a life channel. So we're going to get to digging into that particular instance as well. one thing you got to understand is that when it comes to boxing, when it comes to MMA, it really just depends on who is judging that night. Really. That's really all that it means, especially when it goes to the judges' scorecards. Well, Dana White said it best. Don't leave it in the hands of the judges. Now, I want to say something about that. Sometimes you got to leave it in the hands of the judges, because when you have a high technical fight, what are you going to do? You're going to try to knock them out? Well, what if you can't? That's what we have judges for. So it's a cop-out to say, well, don't leave it in the hands of the judges. Sometimes you have to, because fights that are this highly technical are going to do exactly just that. Okay? They need to be on their P's and Q's. And by the end of the day, no one is right and no one is wrong. The only people that are right or wrong are the ones that really matter in the right or wrong are the judges that are there that night. And we have to live with those decisions. Now, were there times where a scorecard was so horrendous that they had to do something about it? One MMA fight that I have in mind is Maldonado versus Fedor Emelianenko. They fought in M1 Global. Maldonado was outboxing Fedor Emelianenko, beating him up in the cage. And then after 3 some odd rounds, they scored the fight for Fedor, only for months later to reverse that decision because of the horrendous scorecards. And then they eventually gave it to Maldonado, or I believe they made it a no contest, or they just gave the win to Maldonado or something to that extent. But I urge you to look up that fight to reference this particular instance that I'm trying to give you. So not all fights are like Fedor and Maldonado. Not at all. They're not. However, it is important to understand that most fights are predicated on who's judging that night, and you really have to understand that. There is no screw job. There is none of this and that. Both men did great. Bivol did great. Bivol can come back and easily become one of the greatest 175ers. But I also honestly think, in my humble opinion, that there's nobody better than Arthur Beterbiev right now at 175. And in fact, those 12 rounds that he did with him is so critical in the rematch that Arthur Beterbiev is going to have better game planning, knowing that he's already been in there with him. So that rematch alone would make it even more dangerous for Bivol, if not even give an opportunity of a finish for Arthur Beterbiev. But nonetheless, Arthur Beterbiev did great. So there is no karma to this situation, and this is where I'm going to get at right now, is his ex-wife, who, by the way, was happy and in glee that he had lost. The reality is this. She didn't understand that he didn't lose anything. He lost the fight, but he gained millions upon millions of dollars for this fight alone. So that's not a win on your part whatsoever. Now, what I said earlier in the beginning of this video, from the very beginning, I said we don't know how toxic this particular relationship is with Bivol and his ex-wife, because good job on Bivol. He doesn't put it out there like Blueface and Krishan, as a reference that I've made earlier. And for those of you that don't know anything about Blueface and Krishan, let me say this. They are a hip-hop couple that has a TV show, a reality TV show, and they are the two most toxic people ever, because let's just be honest about this, right? The urban ghetto community pushes a lot of negativity, and that's the God honest truth. And I'm telling you this from somebody who has worked with rappers, who's been around rappers, who's been around hip-hoppers, who's been around in the streets and understands that culture. That's just the God honest truth. So there's none of that with Bivol. Obviously, this guy is not ghetto, or at least we don't know what contextual ghetto really means in the Russian culture or if he even espouses these types of things. We don't know enough about him. What we do know is that this woman is taking a celebration of his loss, which in my opinion, I think is a sign of human weakness, a sign of human imperfection and flaws within a person's personality. How is it that you think you've won something or feel good about this guy losing when in reality he didn't really lose? Because by the end of the day, he only lost to the judges. He didn't lose in his bank account because he made a lot of money for this fight and the Saudis were willing to pay him handsomely as a result of it. So he didn't lose anything. What did he lose? He lost a boxing match. He didn't get knocked out. Now, if he got knocked out brutally by Arthur Beterbiev, then maybe you have a case here. But the reality is he didn't get knocked out. He lived to fight another day. He lived to fight another day and another $1 million up ahead in the next fight. And the way that it sounds like, you're just a bitter ex trying to catch clout in an unknown Russian podcast, or I don't know, maybe it's a well-known Russian podcast that was reacting to the fight, but nonetheless, that's the reality of your situation. You will forever just be known as the ex-wife. And then, even worse than that, people will forget about you. Nobody even knows who Muhammad Ali's wives were, although there are some that are well documented and well known. The reality is that nobody really remembers them. Nobody even remembers anybody that is in anyone's family other than the actual fighters themselves. Do you think that somewhere down the line, people are going to remember Shane Fury? No. Do you think somewhere down the line that because he's the brother of Tyson Fury, that people are going to remember Tommy Fury forever? Well, maybe. And that is the message that I want to give to Arthur Beterbiev's ex-wife. The only way that Tommy can ever be remembered the way that his brother is, if you go out and you do something great. And I highly doubt that you can do anything other than get on a podcast and act like a bitter woman. Now, a lot of the accusations that she's thrown at Bivol, I mean, look, here's something you got to understand, man. It's none of our business. We don't know what's going on. But like what I've said in most of my podcasts and what I've said in most episodes and videos and things of that nature is that there are no good guys and bad guys in life. They only exist in movies. Whenever there's a conflict between two people, rest assured that both of those people are as responsible over one or the other. And then there are people that are just being provoked into a situation that leaves them no choice but to take certain actions, whether you agree with it or not. And that is all that I have today for this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I will see you guys in the next content, the next fights, the next reaction, and everything else in between. Inshallah.
Yeah, so that's great. I like that. I like that a lot. What the last thing that I just said there are no good guys or bad guys. I'm going to tell you why I like that, why I think it's important to point that out. The reason why it's important to point out that there are no such things as good guys and bad guys. Let's be honest about this, right? The Dagestanis are seen as the bad guys in MMA. But when you ask a lot of the fighters and the fans that have interacted with them, they will tell you that they are nothing more than just absolute pleasant gentlemen, respectful, everything, all of that, right? Righteous Muslims. But if you read in the comment section of MMA Guru or any of these MMA websites, I mean, there's a lot of Islamophobia that comes into play when you are dealing with, let's say, content that deals with a lot of their opponents, right? Like, for example, obviously, Conor McGregor, that's a great example of that. And by the way, how about this? I believe Conor McGregor is going to corner Paul Hughes, the Irish fighter, who's going up against Usman Nurmagomedov, the 155 Bellator champion. I believe that is one of those PFL versus Bellator type of fights. But nonetheless, that's what I'm trying to say is that the Dagestanis are villainized in the game. And why is that? Well, there's a lot of reasons. There's a lot of reasons why. A lot of reasons. I think their success does rub certain people the wrong way. That is a great possibility and a reality. Not only does their success rub a lot of people the wrong way, you also got to understand there is still an era left in the residue in the hearts of people from 9/11 that sort of share an anti-Islamic sentiment. And here's the thing, right? When I was younger, I had an attitude where, oh, you know what? F these people or this and that, they're against me or whatever. But then as I got older, I started realizing, you know what? I can kind of understand where the Islamophobia comes from. I mean, obviously, a lot of it comes from a place of ignorance, just not being exposed to a lot of people. But then you also got to understand, like what I said earlier, this is very important to understand. There are no good guys or bad guys in the world, because the idea of just good guys and bad guys is nothing more than a fairy tale, to be quite honest with you. People have a lot of circumstances that should be taken into consideration, but they don't. And the reason why they don't take certain nuances into consideration is because a lot of people just expect the world to look like a cartoon or a movie image that they've seen and portrayed, okay, or seen portrayed in the films, right? Like a lot of people emulate their happiness through what they see on TV. So growing up, if you watch Family Matters, if you watched Full House, Saved by the Bell, Step by Step, all of these American family style of sitcoms, right? You had an idea of what your family wanted to look like, or what your family should be, or what your home life should be. Quite frankly, a lot of that really puts many people into depression. Let's just be real about it. Like, how does that not put you in depression that you go and try and compare your life to everyone else? You know, I'll tell you this, right? A come up is not what a lot of people think it is. I mean, let me just explain from my anecdotal experience, right? Because everyone's experience is going to vary, and I cannot deduct anything that a lot of people are going through to any degree. But let me just say this: the current situation I'm at right now is more than thankful. Okay, that's the best way to describe it. But prior to that, I lived in an apartment area where it was, let me just flat out say it was the hood in Sacramento, in the Fulton Arden area. Okay. But even though I was living a modest means in the hood, guess what? Near me was a mosque, and then right down the street was 24-hour fitness to work on different types of fitness. And then down the street was the Muay Thai gym that I had trained out of to win a Muay Thai amateur state title. Okay, so it was all down the street. So as a result, all of a sudden you move up and you're sort of away from all that. So then you sort of think, okay, well, is this a win? Okay, maybe. I have a bigger living condition, a better living condition, so maybe perhaps it is. but maybe it's not. Maybe the best times are always the come up. And here's the thing that's consistent about the Dagestanis, right? It doesn't matter if they are the top fighter or if they are the prelim fighter in their gym. Every single one of them operates like it is their first day. In other words, look, most gyms, well, let me just compare this to Conor McGregor, okay? Because how can you not love having a Conor McGregor conversation with the Dagestanis, right? You can't have a Dagestani conversation without Conor McGregor. And on top of that, you just can't have an MMA conversation without Conor. So here it goes, right? When Conor got rich, I mean, it was always like this, but he runs his gym, and that's not the way that it should be. It should be that you are the soldier and your trainers are the general. That's not how it works in the world of Conor McGregor. In fact, he ran his camp like the Nazi regime of Hitler. You want to know why he ran it like that? Because when Hitler was the general and the commander in chief of his nation, he micromanaged every single military operation. And you can't do that. You got to let the generals do their work. And as a trainer, you are the general, so you got to let them do their work and you got to fall in line like a soldier. That's not how it goes in a lot of camps where there's guys that are the big honcho of the camp, right? What he says goes, not the trainer. But in the world of the Dagestanis, that's not how it is. In the world of the Dagestanis, Khabib is the general because he's the head trainer. Javier Mendez is the general because he's the head trainer. They fall in line like soldiers and say, you know what? We surrender rank to you. So I think that's a proper way of being a fighter and being in a camp. Don't you think? I honestly think, yeah, that there is something to that. Uh, I think that it is important to let your trainers do their job, but unfortunately, there's a lot of camps that don't do that at all. So, how about Ian Gary, right? Fighting against Shafkat. That's going to be a tough one. Let me show you a video that I made about Colby Covington and Ian Gary. In fact, yeah, you know what? I have a lot of Ian Gary videos. Ian Gary, yeah, he's a bit of a topic in my page. Ian Gary, okay. Dating back all the way to UFC 298. Oh yeah, UFC 298, that was a good one. Okay. I should have taken that one down. The part where it said premiered October. Okay. All right. Oh yeah. Let's go back in time with this one. Ian Gary caused Magny to lose his kids. Yeah, Armin defeats Beneil Dariush. That was a year ago. So it kind of falls in line with and then Mike Perry. All right, yeah, let's play this year from a year ago.
happened, and it was headlined by none other than Mike Perry and Eddie Alvarez, titled "The King of Violence," as sort of like a BMF belt, but for the bare knuckle boxing version of it all. Now, out of nowhere, Eddie Alvarez gets stopped in the corner somewhere in the second round or so, second or third round in between that, and could not continue. Once again, this proves that this particular sport is something that is built for certain people in the likes of Mike Perry. Now, why is that important to bring out? Mike Perry is less of an accomplished mixed martial artist than Luke Rockhold, than Eddie Alvarez, and now he's beaten two former UFC champions in a completely different discipline. And that's very important to know. Why? Because some people are built for certain types of fighting disciplines and others are just not. For example, Bukaw, the world-renowned Muay Thai fighter from Thailand. This is a guy that has an absolute niche for specifically Muay Thai. I can't imagine this guy doing, let's say, a jiu-jitsu competition and doing well, right? Especially not at the highest level, let alone even regional jiu-jitsu or grappling levels. He's made for Muay Thai. He's got hard shins, which means that if he kicks you, you're going to be debilitated to a certain degree. You're going to feel it. And he's conditioned to also take shots in the shin himself if you try to fire back at his legs. Mike Perry, well, how do I say this? He's a guy that if, let's say, he has some technical deficiencies, okay, because sometimes he does, but other times, guess what? He compensates for toughness. And that is something that, quite frankly, is just not common with a lot of men. I mean, sure, it's common with a lot of fighters, and you may think that it's common to say that, well, this fighter is tough and this fighter is that. Mike Perry is actually really tough, and this is the reason why he's able to pull off these types of wins against former world champions, once again, in a completely different discipline that otherwise, had Mike Perry took them on in, let's say, mixed martial arts rules with gloves on and grappling involved, I think it's fair to say he doesn't have a chance with Eddie Alvarez, or at least a very good chance of losing to either Eddie Alvarez or Luke Rockhold, these two current wins that he has under his belt. So the man is completely made for the sport nonetheless. That's the bottom line about it. In other news, you had the UFC. An absolute embarrassment of a stoppage from the referee in the Jalen Turner versus Bobby Green fight. Now, Bobby Green, in all honesty, this is going to come back and bite him. Because all throughout the fight week, he messed around with Arman Tsarukyan, tried to get in his face. Sure, we can say that Arman Tsarukyan tried to get in his face. The bottom line is you don't know who started what. But the fact of the matter is it's just not a good look that you go there, get into a street fight, lose, by the way, in the first round, while your other opponent won his fight in less than, good knows how long was that fight, not even that long. Anyways, first round knockout nonetheless. That's what you have going on with Arman Tsarukyan taking on Beneil Dariush. And by the way, you guys saw the video that I made, and I noticed that the views started jumping up just a little bit more even after the fight because they were curious to see exactly what I was talking about when I put that gold medal on Islam and I put the silver medal on Arman Tsarukyan in terms of the current 155-pound hierarchy. Now, obviously, that's not the official rankings, but I think the performance in and of itself proved exactly what I've been saying all along about Arman Tsarukyan. And quite frankly, you've seen it in their first fight. back in 2019 in Moscow, which, by the way, was his UFC debut. So that fight right there in and of itself aged very well. And Beneil Dariush taking out the number 4 lightweight in the world is no easy task, and there it is. Now, let's get to the main event of this whole entire fiasco, because you're here for Ian Garry. We can talk about the kicks and punches all day of all the combat sports that are going on in the world. I can do that for a separate video. I've done it for this video. I've broken down a little bit of what had happened in some of the main fights that had happened last night. But I want to talk about something that I saw online regarding Jesse on Fire reporting Ian Garry and Neil Magny. Now, you would think Neil Magny should be out of Ian Garry's sight, right? He's moved on. He's going to face Vicente Luque in the next coming 2 weeks, by the way. Less than 2 weeks now. And Neil Magny should be far, far away from the mind of Ian Garry. And it is. Ian Garry doesn't care. But also, Ian Garry does not care that Neil Magny could potentially lose his custody battles with his kid based on the interactions they had at the press conference. Because of the fact that, well, Neil Magny joked around about, I'm going to school you, or I'm going to batter you like you're my son, or this and that. And of course, Ian Garry took that the real wrong way as a low-hanging fruit reversal attack against Neil Magny, as to say, you hurt children, and I'm not going to stand for that. And he actually believed that in his head while he was fighting Neil Magny. Now, Ian Garry looked great in that fight. He looked absolutely amazing. What also looked amazing was his level of motivation, his enthusiasm, his optimal state of arousal as the fight was going on. He was locked in. Why is that? Because he was highly motivated. Fighting, to be quite honest with you, requires a serious amounts of motivation in order for you to get in there and batter someone, to get the win, or to get the submission, to get the knockout. This is what you have to do. Not all the time, but sometimes. There are guys out there that can perform at a sports level and just see it as a pragmatic point of view, as to say, you know what? I'm here to win, and that's all that I need to do. I just need to do X, Y, and Z. I just need to stick behind my jab. I just need to use my range. I just need to use my wrestling when it's necessary and control the top position. And somewhere eventually I'm either going to win by decision or get a stoppage or a submission if it presents itself. That's the best way you can look at, quote unquote, a sports-minded point of view in fighting, a pragmatic and non-emotional, stoic point of view. The problem is, with Ian Garry, he used it in a way against Neil Magny that unfortunately affected him even right after his fight. Because, again, I've never read anything about these reports of Neil Magny's current trial custody battles that he has going on. But I'm going to give you some objective takes on this matter at hand. Because now a lot of people are going to blame Ian Garry for this. And we got to ask ourselves, is the blame warranted? And my answer to that right now, and of course this can change at either times because I'm giving you all objective point of views and maybe even some subjective opinions along the way. This is the matter of fact about it. It's not Ian Garry's fault why he has child custody battles. And I know a lot of people in the MMA community who have this red pill mentality, once again, with good reasons, right? There's nothing wrong with the red pill movement or their ideas or anything like that. But sometimes it can be very misdirected. And Ian Garry, in this case, is a prime example of how misdirected that can be. So just because you don't like Ian Gary's stance on his life, you don't like the fact that he has this unorthodox way of living, an unorthodox marriage with changing his last name to his wife's last name for whatever you make of that as you will, you want to somehow correlate that into blaming him for Neil Magny and his life's problems. And the problem with that concept is that I don't think all those things are correlated, at least not to its fullest extent. Now, did Ian Gary perpetuating the narrative of Neil Magny being a child abuser somehow bring light to his court case within his custody battles? Probably. The problem with that is, what is the evidence other than some MMA fighter who's fighting you, who has everything against you, who's going to use any low-hanging fruit argument to destroy your narrative before the fight and demoralize you into a fog of war? Why would you take Ian Gary's word over a press conference and correlate that to a court case in which he has some dealings with some child custody battle issues? A lot of people don't see the problem with that. But at the same time, is that the problem within our own court system, that they're willing to believe an MMA fighter that's fighting another MMA fighter that he is a child abuser? And by the way, let's address that. What exactly did Neil Magny say in full context to truly understand what it is that people are so mad about, and in particular, what Ian Gary is so angry about? Well, I'll tell you. He basically said, and I'm going to be honest, okay? I took this out of Jesse on Fire when I was watching, because obviously this video is entirely inspired by Jesse on Fire's video on Ian Gary and Neil Magny's situation. And then, of course, I just added the BKFC and the UFC Fight Night news to go along with it. He said something to the effect of, I'm going to beat you like you're my son, because let's put this in full context, okay? Ian Gary, okay, is a young vet. He's a young vet, okay? Neil Magny, on the other hand, is none other than... Hold on. How you doing, guys? I'm filming a podcast, if you don't mind. Look at this. Low riders in California. Look at this. Low riders in California. See, like I told you, you never know what is going to happen in this particular channel, right? So, again, they got a little low rider show going on here. So let me just one more time give you guys some. Hold on. All right, a little low rider show for you guys. So where was I? Look, I was leaning towards a good point with Ian Gary and Neil Magny there. I thought it was worth interfering with that. So as I was saying, all Neil Magny was trying to say was that he is the older veteran and Ian Gary is the kid. Plain and simple. He is the OG and Ian Gary is the young G coming up. And that's just what it is. And he's saying, in a competitive spirit, I'm going to beat your behind like you're my son. And of course, Ian Gary's going to run with that. Now, look, here's the thing that people need to understand, right? A lot of people are so upset at Ian Gary they are upset at Ian Gary because of the fact that Neil Magny is an American hero. You guys understand that? Neil Magny served in the U.S. Army during the War on Terror era, right? This is like somebody serving as a U.S. Marine or as a U.S. Army guy or a Navy guy during the Vietnam War. Or if you served during World War II, which, by the way, you know, to some degree, a lot of people look at as even more prestigious because of the fact that, well, more people agreed with that war than, let's say, these current wars that are going on in the Middle East and elsewhere. But nonetheless, Neil Magny served his country. And to some people, they're going to look at that and say, you know what? He's a hero. Why would you do that? But also, the other side of that, what you people don't understand is that I'm not saying Neil Magny is part of this in any capacity whatsoever, but let's be honest. There's a lot of child abuse that goes on in the military. A lot of guys who are in the military have faced these types of charges, let alone domestic charges and this and that. And again, I'm not saying that Neil Magny is anything like that, but all that I'm really trying to say is his case is so unrelated to what is happening with Ian Gary, in my humble opinion. Did Ian Gary bring it up, and did he somehow shed light onto it in a negative way that could affect him? 100% yes, that is the truth. Also, you have to take into consideration the accountability on the part of Neil Magny. What happened with him in order for him to get in these custody battles? And again, I shouldn't judge anyone because you don't know anyone's relationship behind closed doors, especially when most people, rightfully so, keep it in private and don't say much about it, right? So you can't really know one way or the other if Neil Magny was at fault with any of this. At the same time, you have to ask yourself, what is the accountability in terms of how he could have managed that relationship, how he could create some sort of dialogue with either his baby mom or ex-wife or whatever it is that this particular conflict with the child, the child custody battles take place in, right? You have to ask yourself, what could he have done and what could he have not done in order to create higher preventative measures? And that right there is a real issue that a lot of people don't like to take into consideration. So once again, is Ian Gary to be blamed for this? Well, let's end it with this, right? Suppose for whatever reason, his child custody battles goes wrong, right? Let's say he loses the custody battles of his kids. Are they going to look back and say that Ian Gary was to be blamed for any of this? Partially, but at the same time, could you really be honest with yourself and say, this is what fighters do? You step into lion's den, you're going to face the consequences of not just the pain, not just the agony, but also the possible humiliation of what your opponents are going to bring up against you in the press conferences. But now, unfortunately, it's gotten to this situation. It's gotten to this situation where now Ian Gary and Neil Magny are in completely two separate paths in their life. Ian Gary now has to worry about the personal issues that he has going on in his life and how people are bringing it about in the public space. Just as now Neil Magny has to worry about his life being put in a public space due to the fact that he had an opponent that, well, let's just be honest, cries about people putting his business out there, but is shamelessly putting other people's businesses in terms of something that he knows nothing about, or something that he just wants to jump into certain conclusions so he can create a certain narrative. That's the unfortunate reality of Ian Gary and the Neil Magny situation right now. But unfortunately, also, this is all that I have. I'm going to head to the gym, get a good workout in, and I hope you guys like and subscribe to my channel, inshallah, because I'm going to continue to drop some hot content for you guys in order for you guys to get the most objective point of views in combat sports that nobody else is willing to delve into. Other people and other content creators, they want to delve into narratives. I can do that as well. I have done that, maybe unconsciously, but on a conscious level, my entire goal for this particular MMA channel